Good. Well, thank you very much. That then takes us on to item 11 on the agenda. Paul, it's your paper on incentives, rewards and sanctions.
Thank you, Martin. So this item really concludes one of the commitments that we made in Everyone Counts back at the start of the year, which was fundamentally to review essentially the incentives and sanctions that are in the system, sitting alongside the system of pricing that we have through tariff and other measures. So what you have in front of you today is the outcome of that particular review for your consideration. It recognises, I think, the vital importance of a system of incentives and pricing measures, which do two things really, one of which is not to get in the way of transformation, of change, of patient improvement in patient services, but secondly, more actively, to actually stimulate some of the change that we need in those areas. So that's what you have in front of you. It's the product of work which has been undertaken by the Pricing and Incentives Network, which is, I think, a good example of cross-directorate matrix working with a very strong clinical representation in particular, which has helped us enormously, I think, to get to where we have done. There's been extensive involvement of the Commissioning Assembly in this, both in the form of a dedicated subgroup that there is and the plenary meeting of the Commissioning Assembly, which where there was engagement on this particular topic. And thirdly, it's been subject to wide engagement in the sector over the July to September period. So the things you see in front of you have got widespread support and have been considered carefully by people throughout the system. They sit alongside the things we've talked about separately, which are the pricing strategy which we're pursuing with Monitor, and in particular the engagement around the tariff for 14-15, because clearly tariff needs to sit alongside a process and system of incentives to have that combined impact. And I think it's fair to draw out the parallels between the way we've approached tariff for 14-15 and the way we're approaching incentives for 14-15, which is that essentially in 14-15 we're trying to achieve stability above all other things, because of all the challenges that are in the system. So both on tariff and on these incentives, we've not lit the blue touch paper of vast radical changes. We've tried to improve where there is good evidence that we need to improve, but there's a degree of stability. But allied to that, there is, I think, a move to encouraging local innovation in the way these things are applied, so that where there is something which local healthcare partners around the place wish to implement, they can find their own way within this framework of underpinning them with incentives and indeed underpinning them with tariff prices. So that's the philosophy that's here. I'm not going to go through the individual proposals because they're set out in the paper. Members of the board have had opportunity to input to them at various points in this process, but obviously we can discuss any that are of particular concern or interest. I would draw to your attention the fact, and this links back right to the beginning of today's meeting, I think there is a noticeable move. One of the improvements in this set of incentives is to recognise the parity between physical and mental health. So in just about every dimension of the incentives you see in front of you, we've brought in a stronger component, I think it would be fair to say, of mental health related incentives to try and make sure that that is supported in an equal way. So that's really what I want to say. So what I'm looking for today really is for you to be content with, or otherwise, the conclusions we've reached from the review, because we do intend to publish them as you would expect of our organisation. I would welcome your specific endorsement of the changes that are set out in the paper on the individual measures that we talked about. And thirdly, there is a formality about this, which is that we welcome your delegation to the executive team of the finalisation of this work. There are, as the paper sets out, a number of details that still need to be sorted out within this particular framework, and it's simply not practical to wait until the next board meeting to do all of that, because otherwise our planning processes and contracting processes will not get the right speed behind them. So that's what we're looking for today. Would welcome any support you can give on that, on those fronts.
Thank you, Paul. So the expectation of the board is, first of all, an endorsement of the approach, by which we mean also commending the process which has been undertaken up to this point, and the engagement of members of the board and others. And then secondly, about the key messages that are coming out from the review. And you've touched upon local flexibility, stability and the need for it, and also the move towards greater parity of esteem between mental and physical health. So let me just pause at that level and take comments before we look at some of the specific items that you're asking us to endorse. Kieran.
I think overall I get the stability thing. I worry a bit about ambition and how are we going to get the drive behind some of the shifts we need to have. So not just parity of esteem, but what about supportive self-management? What about general emotional and psychological support, and all of those in. But I also have a bit of a concern that we won't get that ambition if we derogate some of this to a subcommittee of the Commissioning Assembly. Because when we started this off, I remember saying at the time that this was so big, it was something which absolutely had to be done, with the patient voice in the room as well. So I think we've got something that will kind of muddle us through for the year, but I don't think we have something which is going to really engage the patient voice with the same level of esteem as the commissioning voice and the clinical voice. So I think there's something around the process around taking this forward to the next level, which we have to do in a very, very different way.
So,
I mean, because I think you're absolutely right, and in a sense we've got, this always was a short-term piece of work.
Yeah.
The bigger piece of work is in relation to the call to action, where we want to absolutely look at all of this. Because the issue for me, I think, in all of this is what are the behaviours that we're trying to encourage in this, and we can see indeed recent newspaper coverage about the way incentives can sometimes operate in an organisation to create the wrong type of behaviours, and I think transparency is a really important part of this. So one of the things for me, if you take something like Sequin, what can happen with Sequin is that I use this. I don't mean to be rude to finance directors, but the finance director of a trust can say, right, I assume I'm going to get all my Sequin money. And then they build it into the way they do their budgets. And then if they don't deliver on Sequin, it becomes a fining system. So something that started off for clinicians as an incentive to do better ends up as a negative. And that seems to me, you get the wrong behaviours out of all of that. And similarly, I think the transparency thing, particularly for clinicians, and I was at a mental health unit where they had a Sequin around recovery, and they were funding out of the Sequin money a recovery nurse. And I went into a meeting where the nurse was working with a group of patients who all knew that individual was funded through Sequin. And so the patients believed that they could see transparently the way in which the money was running through the system, and they thought it was a fantastic thing it was fascinating. So that was about patients having power and control that you get through transparency. And I think there's a lot more to do in this to make it real and get the kind of behaviours in the right place. And hopefully out of the big work we're going to do for strategy, we can get into all of this.
yeah. Paul, did you want to add to that?
I wanted to say what he just said, so I won't repeat it.
Very good.
I just think
Victor.
that it's a start, and I understand this better because of what you just said. Actually, to be honest, I think it will get us in a sense through the night, but it doesn't map onto the earlier conversations.
Yeah,
and it clearly needs to. I do welcome. When I read it, I didn't leave out to me as much as you've said it about the parity of esteem issues, although they are in there. But again, we had the conversation yesterday. It's great that it's acknowledged in here, but we need to go a lot further, a lot faster.
Right, well, on that basis, I detect reading body language around the board, which is, after all, the responsibility of the chairman. That we are content, more than content. I mean, I think we're very positive about this, very positive about the direction of travel, and putting it into the context that David has just spelt out for us. I think happy to endorse the general approach, but also the specific recommendations, and to delegate authority to the executive team to finalise the details. We are good. Thank you very much.